Hello, everyone. It is my pleasure to welcome this week Sam Ahn. I know him as the Senior Digital Media Coordinator for the Pilots Association, but you may know him as faculty at College of St. Elizabeth. This will be very nice because we get to benefit from his industry expertise, and you get to benefit from having a more formal introduction with him as faculty as well. So thank you so much for being with us today. We're excited to have you.
Absolutely. Thank you for having me on. I'm really excited to be meeting all of you in this capacity during this. I know last time the lecture was a disembodied voice over PowerPoint, so I'm sure it's good to have a face to the sound. So I'm really excited to be here. Thanks.
And if in some atemporal future these courses aren't happening at the same time, you'll have no idea what we're talking about.
Absolutely not. That's part of the fun, isn't it?
Well, I figured why don't we start off with what do you do in your professional career? How do you
Sure.
use social media, and what does it mean to you?
Sure. Like Eric mentioned, I am a senior digital media coordinator at the Airline Pilots Association. The Airline Pilots Association is the world's largest airline pilot union. We represent over 60,000 pilots from 34 different airlines. And what we do is our main goal is to ensure the safety and well-being of pilots and the passengers that they fly on their airlines. And we exist to be that advocate for aviation safety. We're also the largest non-governmental aviation safety organization in the world, and we are one of the most respected voices in government, both in Canada and the United States, when it comes to aviation safety. So we work a lot with the FAA here in the United States to basically make flying safer for everybody. So with that background for the organization, for what we do with social media is we actually have, I would say, 2 or 3 different audiences. I would say 3 audiences. Our first audience is to do internal communications with pilot groups. So what we do is we connect with them on social media. Each of the pilot groups for each of the airlines has a social media account that they use to both connect internally and externally. We also connect with the flying public at large in order to increase awareness of who ALPA, who the Airline Pilots Association is, and kind of we want to really underscore, what goes into being a pilot in terms of safety and the training that's required. And I would say the last group that we try to communicate with is the airline companies and management, because part of what we do, probably the other half of what we do at the Airline Pilots Association, is we represent the pilots and their interests as they work with their employers, who are the airlines.
So audience is something we've talked a lot about in our class so far, and I'm curious, especially with the non-internal audience, how do you get to know your audience and how to serve them well and connect with them well?
Sure. So the important thing to realize is that social media is merely a component of what should be a larger communication strategy for an organization. So it's not the end-all and be-all of communications for an organization. It is actually simply another form of communication that can be utilized to further the communications goals of an organization. So to that end, the way we determine who the audience is at the very beginning we try to figure out who are we trying to reach and for what reason, and what's the message that we're trying to relay. A lot of times, they kind of work hand in hand in terms of whatever the message is. We sometimes figure out who the audience is for that message, and it works the other way around sometimes, trying to figure out who we're trying to reach and what the messaging needs to be. So as an example, in terms of how we go about that in the office, we have a campaign running. It's called the Trained for Life campaign, and what we're trying to do is we're trying to increase awareness both to the flying public as well as to members of Congress and the FAA. to tell them to basically for the public, first off, it's to raise awareness of what actually goes into making sure that your flight is a safe flight, from door to door, from gate to gate, and actually a lot of that safety, is a lot of what goes into the safety of your airplane, and your flight, goes way back even before you book that ticket. So that's the first thing that we try, that the Train for Life the Train for Life campaigns are trying to reach, is the flying public, as well as members of Congress. And the other things that we do at the organization are trying to reach management. So, some of our pilot groups are in the midst of contract negotiations right now, and we're trying to figure out, what's the message that we're trying to raise awareness of, in terms of with management. Do we want to tell them that, hey, you all should really come to the bargaining table so that these pilots can get the pay raises and the contract that they deserve, or who are we trying to tell the flying public to basically kind of pressure these airline companies to hurry up and make sure that your pilots don't go on strike, for instance. So it really does have it works both ways in terms of what's the end goal that we're trying to attain, and then how are we going to get there. So it really is the entire process in terms of trying to figure out who the audience is.
So what would you consider success, and do you have tricks for measuring it? Are there specific analytics tools you use and stuff like that?
Sure. So I would say when we're trying to do a simple kind of external public awareness campaign, one of our major goals of success are how many people saw a video, for instance, or how many people shared an image, or how many people reacted to a post that we put up to a link. So a lot of times the measure of success is in the analytics that we are able to kind of glean from each of the social media networks, and each of these platforms do have a pretty robust analytic suite of analytic tools that they give us access to. It's a lot of very nitty-gritty data, which we actually will be covering in our class. In the Intro to Social Media Design and Management class, we'll actually be covering some of these analytics. But just to give a rough overview for the purposes of this talk, we're able to kind of figure out like what the percentage rate of shares are. And there are some industry benchmarks out there, and based on whatever industry that you are in, whether it be the nonprofit industry or if it's sales, the technology industry, each of these industries has benchmarks that you can find online that third parties have kind of analyzed and put together. But generally speaking, anything more than a 2% engagement rate is typically a good engagement rate. When it comes to like emails that you send out, anything more than like a 15% open rate is a good rate. So a lot of these analytic percentages, they're very low, the bar. And if you think about it for yourself, how many of those junk emails that you received do you actually open? So
That's
a lot of what I like to channel when I'm trying to determine success is my own personal experience as a user of social media. If I look at something and I ask myself, is this compelling enough that I would click on it or I would look at it? If the answer is yes, then it's probably a decent quality content. If it's something that I would never probably click on, it's probably not really worth putting on the internet. And it's hard to kind of take yourself out of the equation at the same time as using yourself as kind of the threshold for what's good and what's not. But it eventually, as you get more experience, and you see the analytic data come through on what worked and what didn't work, you'll learn a lot of times that your gut instinct might actually be right.
So I have to ask, we were chatting casually a while back, and you just kind of off the cuff mentioned, oh yeah, I made this post that yesterday that 90,000 people viewed. So,
Yeah,
what went right in that post? What is there a
sure.
secret? Is it just because your organization is so well connected, or is there something that the average social media user can glean from that?
hmm so there were a couple of factors that played into having that be that successful. We basically the post in question was a live video that we shot um, during an informational picketing event at JetBlue headquarters in Long Island City, New York. It was their first major picketing event, informational picketing event, and over about 700 JetBlue pilots showed up. And just the visuals of 700 pilots in uniform, all in formation, is actually a pretty cool sight. But what really worked for us on that day was the fact that it was a Facebook Live video, and we actually had been priming our audience and our followers to let them know that, hey, tomorrow we're going to have this video coming at about 12 p.m. Be sure to look out for it. And then basically it just kind of happened organically. Um, Facebook is really pushing their live video platform right now. So, if someone is watching a live video, or if someone is shooting a live video, especially if it's from an organization or a page that you follow, most likely you'll see that notification pop up on your news feed. So then you tap on it and you're watching. And if the content itself is compelling enough, which I guess for the people who watched it was compelling enough to just kind of keep watching it, definitely that's what will add to the organic reach of that post. So it really does have to be decent quality content. I actually watched an interesting TED Talk from the people at, I believe, BuzzFeed. And I'll actually be sharing this with you all later in the semester. But it's basically a talk about how they came up with some of the viral content that they had. I don't know if y'all remember the watermelon rubber band video that they came up with I think it was 2 years ago. Basically, it was a video where they just kept putting rubber bands on a watermelon until it exploded, and that was one of their highest performing posts ever. So it really is a matter
Real
of
pithy content.
Yeah, it's really the content doesn't have to be like super like scripted or super fascinating. Some of the points that they touched on was you know what it was interesting for the people, and there was this kind of shared anticipation. So when it comes to live video, it really is a social event where you watch it because you're waiting for something to happen. And perhaps that's what motivated the 90,000 people to watch that video of pilots walking around in a circle. Maybe that they would see people getting into it, or some people yelling things at us or whatever. But a lot of times you can kind of, as long as the content is something that people can connect with at an emotional level, you'll have success with the content itself.
Well, that's really interesting because it raises the issue of both emotional connectivity, anticipation, but also the power of the algorithm and what Facebook wants to push at any given moment.
Right.
And I'm wondering if you have any experience that you can share as far as what are algorithms favoring these days? What works really well on various platforms?
Sure. So coincidentally, that's what we're talking about this week in class.
Oh, perfect.
But kind of just an overview, these algorithms are really kind of they are mysterious because they don't necessarily disclose. And when I say they, I mean all of the platforms now are algorithm based. If, as you all learned for this past week's lecture,
unless in some asynchronous future we haven't actually taken that class yet, in which case you'll have no idea what we're talking about, but we'll just pretend you do.
The class where we talk about the intro to social media platforms and history, we do discuss how they all initially started out as a chronological newsfeed Facebook, if you remember, Facebook at one point was chronological. Twitter was at one point chronological. Instagram was more recently chronological. But all of these platforms initially started out as chronological, and then they quickly realized that people don't necessarily care about what you ate 5 minutes ago. They might care more about the cute puppy pictures that you posted yesterday.
What you ate 30 minutes ago.
Right, exactly. So a lot of times these algorithms, to put it simply, take your feedback and try to predict your future behavior. A lot of times, what you've liked or disliked, what you've shared or what you've hidden in your feeds, that actually plays directly into the algorithms. And the larger the network is, so Facebook actually is connected with a lot of different websites on the internet. So news sites, information, kind of variety, entertainment sites. Facebook does have its tentacles all throughout the internet, and they're able to kind of aggregate that data at large and kind of figure out what your preferences are. So they can figure out everything from what kind of hobbies you're into, what your political affiliation is, what your like or dislike of sports is, based on the stuff that you have provided in terms of feedback. That's how Facebook comes up with the algorithms, and all of the other social networks kind of work and operate in a similar fashion. They are able to come up with who they think you are and then push content to you based on what they assume about you.
I remember a story that came out a few years ago where an unnamed social media platform that I can only assume was Facebook, but could have been anybody, started showing this one girl all of these baby-related ads. And the father they actually filed a lawsuit against the social media platform because the daughter was like 14, 15 years old, and he thought this was wildly inappropriate to be planting these seeds of babyhood. And it turned out that the daughter was pregnant, and neither of them knew. And simply by her interactions on social media, the subliminal hormonal proclivities towards this and that triggered something in the algorithm that made them know that she would need baby stuff. And so they ended up retracting their lawsuit.
That's interesting. That is, yeah. It makes sense to me, and that doesn't surprise me. I think a lot of times, because a lot of it is aggregate data that these social media platforms use. They know more about us even before we know about us. But yeah, that's a good point in that, a lot of the subconscious stuff that we do online, probably actually tells them a lot more about who we are. And I think people kind of have an aversion to that because they want to think that they're unique and an individual. But at the end of the day, we all have similar habits and interests, and there probably is at least one other person out there, if not like a specific group of individuals who kind of think, talk, act like you or me. So I think that is probably the most unnerving thing for some people when it comes to social media and the way that our data is used.
So tell me, what social media platforms do you specifically use most in your line of work? And do you think of how you write for each one differently?
Yeah, so I really do enjoy Facebook, not just because it's my favorite platform to kind of waste my time on, but I do like Facebook because of the tentacles that they've had all throughout the internet. They actually do have the most robust and detailed kind of system for us to kind of do a lot of our marketing efforts. So Facebook has the best tools for that. Followed closely by Twitter, because Twitter allows us to have a level of interaction that you don't necessarily get with Facebook or Instagram. With Twitter, you're able to kind of connect with people and speak to them directly, because it's not like it's not like Facebook where you have to, you have to kind of dig through things to see how people are interacting. It really is a because it's a microblogging. What they started out as is a microblogging site. Basically, people being able to just broadcast their thoughts out into the world. That the fundamentally just the way it's set up. You don't necessarily have to have a direct relationship with someone in order to follow and to see what they're saying and what who they interact with and what they interact with. So Twitter is helpful in reaching people who don't necessarily connect or who aren't necessarily connected with us on their own. LinkedIn is helpful for us to use when we want to connect with professionals. Some of our efforts actually do target future pilots, people who are training to be pilots, people who are looking for pilot jobs. So in that way, we're able to push out content that are an example of the content that we push out are interview workshops that we hold throughout the country for future pilots. So when it comes to more like professional content that would speak to the professional aspects of being a pilot, that's where we push that out. And Instagram, of course, is a very visual platform. So pretty pictures, informative videos that are good for social media. That's what we do on Instagram. So, in that way, we do tailor our content to each of the social media platforms because each of the platforms has a different audience and has a different way of operating. And in that regard, we have to make sure we know what kind of people are on Twitter, what kind of people are on Facebook, what kind of people are on Instagram. So Instagram, we have a lot of we do a weekly Wing View Wednesday post, which is basically the view of someone in a plane overlooking a wing. So if it's a pretty beach or snow-capped mountains, those are our Wing View Wednesdays, and we hope to kind of get people who are interested in pretty aviation pictures to then follow us so that we can then push out some other informative content to them. So in that way, we do individually tailor our content for each platform.
Are there things that you keep in the back of your mind as like hallmark strategies for writing for any given platform? Like, for example, if you had one message that you wanted to get out to Facebook, but also on Instagram, what would be in the back of your mind as far as this is how I write it for Facebook and this is how I write it for Instagram?
Sure. Instagram really requires just a nice caption for the picture. We want the picture to drive the content, and to drive the traffic. We want people to stop and look at the picture. So that is actually a lot of times requires minimal writing. Because what we're trying to do is basically have people stop and take a look at the picture. But when it comes to things, for instance, this past Friday, one of the members of Congress that we've worked with a lot on aviation safety, Representative Louise Slaughter from New York, she passed away on Friday, and we came up with a tweet to kind of it started out as a tweet to send out our condolences. But then we posted it to Facebook and Instagram, and basically we were able to kind of expand out a little bit in terms of the language that we use for Facebook and Instagram, because we have that length. It's a little longer length that we're able to work with on those two platforms as opposed to Twitter. So just practically speaking, the length really does play a lot into how we write. But that doesn't mean we should be comfortable writing an entire dissertation as a Facebook post. Generally speaking, we let what we write for Twitter, kind of be the first stab at it, because Twitter forces us to be clear with what we're saying and be concise. That way, we get the point across that we're trying to make, and then when we tailor that, we tailor that to Facebook and Instagram. If we're going to be doing parallel posts, which allows us to add in a little bit more detail or a little bit more nuance. But that's how we kind of determine what we write and for which platform. It really is a matter of having a clear message, and Facebook and Instagram really being the places where we add the nuance in.
It's kind of an almost perhaps a counterintuitive approach to most writers who are used to writing and then editing down and editing down and editing down, whereas you're kind of starting with the most central nugget, and then I get to expand and I get to expand.
Right, exactly. And I think it really, being a good writer is so important when it comes to social media writing, because if you're able to make your point in 280 characters or less, that's a good starting point. And you have to have clarity of message in any type of writing that you do. That people we like to reward brevity on social media, because it really does allow us to really. It seems counterintuitive, but brevity actually captures more attention than longer forms, because you have the TLDR, the too long didn't read phenomena of social media. So if you have a clear message and you know exactly what you're trying to say, you should be able to say it in 280 words. 280 characters, and then of course expand out as needed for other platforms. But really, if it takes you more than 280 characters to say something, then your message is way too long and way too complicated, and it won't stick with anybody.
Interesting. From the social media management side of things, walk me through what your typical day looks like trying to schedule this stuff and put it all out there, and
Sure.
if you have any tips on how you just don't get buried in a pile of social media, how do you keep on top of a workflow?
Sure. So an ideal day, and an ideal day is where there's no major news happening. In an ideal day, I'll come in. We do have a service at the organization that kind of gives us news clips from the night and the morning, that anything that mentions any sort of aviation, or if it mentions our organization. So we have news clips, and we kind of go through that in the morning to see if there's anything that we want to share. Of course, this is operating under the a priori assumption that there is a good editorial calendar system in place, which we do also talk about in the Intro to Social Media Design and Management class. But an editorial calendar is basically giving you a chance to plan out short-term, long-term, and longer-term in terms of what are some things that are coming down the pike. So, once a month we'll have an editorial content meeting where we discuss, things that are on the calendar for that month. If there are any special days, for instance, this month is Women's History Month. So we've had a lot of planned out content that features a lot of our female pilots. So kind of having, understanding what some of the news hooks are. We had some content for St. Patrick's Day for some of our pilot groups where we came up with graphics. So really just understanding, what is today about? What are the news items? Do we have any news hooks for today? What's planned out on the schedule? And of course, that's an ideal day. When we have breaking news, so like I said, this past Friday with the passing of Representative Slaughter, that came through at about, I think I got the news alert about 10 a.m. And at that point, she was, we worked very closely with her after the very last airliner crash with passenger fatalities that happened in 2009. That's the last time we had a crash, actually. So that's a nugget for you all. Is the last time there was an airliner crash with a passenger fatality was 2009, February of 2009. We haven't had a single passenger death since then on an airline carrier.
Not too bad.
So part of the work that we did with her was to kind of increase the safety and training requirements for airliners. So we definitely needed to have something out. So I forwarded the news item to the rest of the team, and they agreed that we should put something out. We got the approvals that we needed, and basically came up with the social media copy. And then once that was done, we found a good image of her that I actually had taken a few weeks ago during a press conference, and we posted that on social media. And we actually did share it on Instagram and Twitter and Facebook, and basically just tracking, what people are saying and how people are reacting. So when something like that happens, we try to have a mechanism in place, a process in place to get quicker approvals of content. And of course, that in a larger organization, we need that approvals process. But in a smaller organization, if you are the main person kind of managing the social media, you probably don't have to have as much of a process for that. But even when I've worked in a smaller organization, I at least run by someone. So it's always good to kind of build that lead time in when you're coming up with content. Let's see. Some of the other stuff that I'll do on a day-to-day basis is kind of pull analytic reports from Facebook and Twitter. We also have some campaigns running on Google and on YouTube. So basically pulling out those analytic reports, combing through the data, and basically pulling out the important nuggets of what worked, what didn't work, why did it work, why did it not work, what are some recommended next steps. And then another major thing that I do on a day-to-day basis is setting up campaigns on Facebook and Twitter, social media campaigns. The thing that we're having to deal with now in today's social media climate, as it were, is that Facebook is on this quest to make Facebook more personal, which basically means that they're trying to pull more ad revenue from businesses and organizations. So we actually have to force our way into people's news feeds now by boosting posts. So trying to figure out, who are we trying to boost it to? Why are we boosting it, and what will work the best when boosted? So a lot of time is spent on kind of mapping out those audiences and mapping out a budget for what we're trying to push out there. So that's a typical day: writing social media copy, doing analytics, and setting up promotional campaigns on Facebook and other social media platforms.
How much time are you actually spending consuming social media content, or commenting on other people's stuff, replying to other people? And do you use a social media management tool to try and keep on top of it?
Sure. So we do use a social media tool called Hootsuite, which once again we'll discuss in our social media management and design class. But it's a tool that allows us to schedule out posts. It also allows us to monitor multiple feeds in a single view. So it kind of helps us keep a pulse on what's going on in social media. As far as what I do in terms of monitoring the organization's social media posts, Twitter, you get notifications for if people mention you in a tweet or retweet some of your tweets. It is a social platform, which means that you do have to be social. So it could be something as simple as liking someone's post or liking someone's comment or sharing someone's post or retweeting someone on Twitter. That really creates that connection between you and that user. So I would say I only spend about 10% of my time actually doing that. It's one of the first things that I do in the morning, aside from news clips, is kind of see, how the social media feeds are, and if there's anything would be nice to retweet or quote or like or share. That's when I do it in the morning when I come in. So it's kind of like a garden. You do need to tend to it if you want to make it grow. I think there are some organizations. There are I would say a lot of organizations that tend to kind of start a social media account and then post things once a day, but they don't really tend to their audience, and that's when you need to that's something that you need to do in order if you want to make that if you want to increase that engagement, increase that emotional and personal connection with your audience.
It's just algorithmically to their advantage to do so, aside from being able to keep the finger on the pulse and all of that as well.
Correct, yeah. Those algorithms That's a big deal. They really do dictate a lot of what people see on their feeds.
Well, I have just a couple more questions for you, and I think these are questions that kind of try and bridge the gap between the professional social media manager and the maybe individual entrepreneur who wants to use social media effectively. So, how do you differentiate or how do you coordinate your professional online presence and your personal social media online presence? Do you think of them differently? Do you treat them differently?
Yeah, that's interesting. That's an interesting way. That's an interesting question, rather. When anytime I'm on my social media, on my personal social media, I always have kind of whether it be consciously or subconsciously, I always have my feelers out to see what people are posting on social media and what seems to be getting a lot of traction and a lot of interest. So yeah, I take a lot of my cues of what's working on social media during any given day to see if what might work, what I can steal in terms of design or content ideas to use for my own organization's benefit, or to kind of have something that's trending. The other thing that I like to do is I do follow a lot of social media kind of professionals and publications out there that also kind of pull some information on latest trends. Like we found out about the social media professional community found out about Mark Zuckerberg's come to Jesus moment that he had at the beginning of this year, and trying to make Facebook more personal. Then that people, there were definitely two types of people in my feed that day. There was the normal Facebook user who thought it was the best idea ever, and then you had the social media professionals, and all they saw from that story was, oh crap, we're going to have to spend more money. And that's kind of what it's panning out to be, is that where social media professionals are having to put a little bit more work and a little bit more money behind their social media efforts. So that is basically kind of the way I like to use social media, just to kind of get a sense of what's going on out there.
Almost
It definitely
go undercover.
Definitely leaves you with a little bit of cynicism, I guess, because you know exactly what's going on when you're trying to when specific trends are happening, like which I think the latest one I saw was which Muppet are you, and that when they ask for your access to your Facebook. Oh, I haven't done it because I know all they're trying to do is push more things on me, marketing wise, spamming me with more more Canadian pharmacy emails. I mean, everything on social media. I think a good way of looking at it is if you're not paying for it, then you're the product. You are what's being sold. If you're not having to pay for it, you are actually what is being sold. And that's true for Facebook. Facebook's never going to charge you to use it, because they're not getting money off of you. They're getting money off of your data, and you, not you, but you. They're getting money. They're selling your data and your trends and your interests as their product. So that's something important to keep in mind as well. And you learn that very quickly, that when you see things pop up on your feeds, you know exactly why it popped up, because you would probably do the same thing if you were sitting at that social media manager's desk. So it definitely adds an interesting level of cynicism when you're working on social media, because you know now how the sausage gets made.
Yeah. So is there I know in my own just sort of perusing of the internet and my own research, Buffer, the social media management tool Buffer, has a wonderful blog that really digs deep into analytics and stuff like that. Are there any resources that you would recommend for trying to keep on top of your social media game?
There are definitely a lot of organizations out there that do a lot of work with social media in terms of the information that they disseminate. The one thing that I've found most helpful is I'm actually a member of a few Facebook groups where it's basically just social media professionals.
Okay.
I'm in the DC area, so there's a Facebook group called DC Social Media. I don't know if there's an analog for the where you all are based out of, but that's always helpful because having more people out there just looking for the content is always helpful. There's no way you can actually see or read everything that's out there. So if there are some kind of affinity groups or interest groups for social media management that are related to either the industry you're in or the geographic region you're in, definitely connect with those because that's one way to actually connect with people both online and offline. I know a lot of in the groups that I'm in, a lot of jobs actually get posted there too. So if you're a regular contributor to the page, make a name for yourself and you share information and data. Next time a job description comes along in that group, it might be beneficial for you to have interacted with the group so that they know who you are and you might get a job out of it. So really tapping into the actual social network in your area for your industry is extremely helpful. Your traditional kind of outlets like Ad Age, any sort of like marketing and communications professional publications, they actually do have a lot of things. And there's a good organization. I believe they're called it's an organization called N10. It's the nonprofit technology. I forget what what it stands for, but it's basically a organization of nonprofit digital communications and IT people, and of course, social media is digital communications, so they do a lot of stuff on that. And of course, follow your instructors because we also have our networks of people who are in the industry. So we'll share things from time to time on our network. So probably the easiest way is just to follow either Eric or myself.
Speaking of following your instructors, if someone wants to follow your work, what would be the best way for them to follow you? Give a little plug for yourself, your own presence here.
Sure. So I am on Facebook. You can follow me, facebook.com/SAHNCSE. I believe that's it. Sure.
You're going to be following it's all a decoy.
If it's not correct,
red herring.
I will pass the corrected one along. I believe. Oh no, I might be Sam Ahn CSE. So facebook.com/Sam Ahn CSE or twitter.com. I'm at Sam Ahn CSE, and I do go on there and share things on occasion. So definitely follow me, and you'll see who I'm following, and a lot of these people might be a good idea for you to follow as well. So yeah.
Great. Well, it's been a pleasure. Thank you so much for sharing your insight and your wisdom. And
absolutely.
If we were in person, we'd be giving you a round of applause.
Thank you. I will pretend I'm hearing it right now. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much.
All right. Take care.
You too.
Bye.